So the day finally came and went. Netflix finally released their adaptation of Death Note after dealing with nothing but controversy in the lead up. From the initial trailer, it was met out the gate with nothing but pure hatred. After subsequent trailers, things certainly improved, but overall, many were still rooting for this film's failure. Upon release, regardless of the actual quality of the film, it was doomed. But what I set out to do was to find out how good or bad this film truly ended up being. Was the film an absolute travesty, or was it actually a surprising gem? After sitting through the film multiple times, I think I found my answer. Kind of. Ladies and gentlemen, Netflix's Death Note. Now, there are three different perspectives someone would come into this film with, and the ones I'd like to address before getting to the other two are the ones who want this film to be an exact replica of the original anime. I'm just going to say it, if you're wanting an exact recreation from the film, you're going to hate every single minute it's on screen. This new Death Note only resembles the original in name and concept, nothing else. The characters are hugely different, and oftentimes weaker than the anime counterparts. The story takes a completely different route, and the film takes on a much more serious tone than the original, for better or for worse. If you want the original Death Note in live action, steer clear of this by all means. At that rate, I'd recommend the Japanese films. They're certainly a bit goofy, and a bit hard to take seriously as well, but I enjoyed them personally. With that out of the way, let's get into the bulk of this video. Netflix's Death Note is an adaptation, and thus changes several elements of the original work. In fact, I'd say that this took a more serious, action-oriented approach, as opposed to the anime's slower build-up and plot twists. I will be discussing this film as a film that uses the Death Note concept and only relating certain aspects to the anime from here on out. I wanted to approach this film from the perspective of wanting something a bit different, but also something that wouldn't completely screw up the legacy of the original series. And speaking of screwing up, let's move on to the characters first, specifically Light. Light isn't just a far cry from the anime, but also just not much of an enjoyable character in general. As in, even if you've never seen Death Note, you're still going to have a problem with him. As I feared, he's originally portrayed as an edgy teen seeking revenge on a cheap schoolyard bully-esque character. He's whiny, pretentious, and man, the actor really screwed up some of the lines. There's a scene where early on he defends Mia, or this film's version of Misa, from a bully, and he screams in a way that is just so cringeworthy that it's not even funny. Throughout the film as well, his lines vary from passable to borderline horrible at times. Like seriously, I think they should have re-recorded some of these because geez, they're just bad. In fact, I don't think Light gets super interesting until the end of the film, but we'll get into that later. Regardless, this character is less intelligent than the original Light as well. I mean, I expected them to scale down the genius of the characters, but whereas it feels like they only dropped L down 2 levels, they dropped Light down 3. Especially on the second watch, it became extremely obvious that Light was at a huge disadvantage because, just in general, he's not all that bright. I mean, sure, the film says he's bright, but you're supposed to show, not tell, and they certainly do more of the latter until the direct end of the film. L, however, is at least a bit better. They retained his quirky aspects, which, though they feel a bit forced at times, they still made me smile from how they were implemented. In fact, in general, L was pretty good if we're separating him from the anime L who could never be beat. He still seems smart, quirky, and in the latter half of the film it approaches an entirely different route than the anime did. We get to see L put in a much more desperate situation, and I actually kinda like seeing these aspects applied to the character. Sure, he can't beat the original L, but he's alright. Ryuk is absolutely fantastic. Willem Dafoe was a wonderful choice and remains surprisingly bone-chilling throughout. The film takes a much darker route with this version of Ryuk, making him much more terrifying and unpredictable. Instead of being the comic relief, he's instead kind of a monster, but in a good way. Also, the way he manipulates Light gets really interesting, as he never actually lies to manipulate, he just doesn't tell him the full truth. This chaotic version of Ryuk was great in my book, and is easily one of the highlights of the film. And finally, that leads to Mia. I can't say much without getting into spoilers, but let's just say that she's nuts in a good way. And a lot of the foreshadowing in the film surrounding her is really brilliant, and I only realized that upon a second viewing. She's a completely different character than the Misa from the anime, but I wouldn't necessarily say it's a bad thing, bearing in mind that the later part in the movie doesn't bother you, but we'll get to that in the spoiler section. Foreshadowing in general is something that this film does really well. A lot of the lines and scenes that would seem throwaway actually have much more meaning later in the film. For example, at one point it shows Light and Mia in a room while Mia is watching a particularly brutal movie. This is a nice subtle hint at Mia's general craziness, and the film is full of sections and lines throughout that subtly hint at later events or carry more meaning later. Mentioning that movie Mia was watching, actually, it was pretty gory, and indeed this movie is the same way. It's surprisingly gory to a point where it actually bothered me a bit. I don't mind the gore personally, but its placement is really odd and really took me out of the film every time the deaths got a little too crazy for my liking. Also, the pacing in this film, well, it isn't great. It certainly keeps things moving, but it goes way too fast to feel comfortable. It never rests for a second, it's always sprinting forward, meaning that the scenes that really matter blow by too quickly. Heck, within about a minute of the film starting, Light gets the notebook. Yeah, seriously, no lead up, nothing. And then he just picks it up and boom, next scene. In fact, the beginning in general is horrible. It's the absolute worst part of this movie. Light's being an angsty teen, this bully is so one-dimensional he's almost pointless, and oh geez Light, everything coming out of your mouth is just horrible. Thankfully, things improve once Ryuk shows up. And he shows up in a pretty brilliant scene actually. I adore the amount of effort that was put into the whole classroom going crazy. Still, the film has pockets here and there that get annoying or just awkward, and it really makes the quality of the film drop because of it. But, mentioning that classroom scene does bring up a good point. This film looks really interesting at times, and you can tell they put a lot of money and effort into the spectacle. Also, even if the pacing is a bit too fast, the film never gets boring, at least not for me. There was never a point where I just wanted it to end. Even upon repeated viewings, I was able to be continually entertained, even if it wasn't always in the way the movie intended. Also, at bare minimum, this film did seem to understand at least some of what the original material was trying to do. They play with the concept of justice in this film a bit. Instead of focusing on how everyone has a different concept of justice and how that doesn't actually mean they're correct, it instead focuses a bit on the moral gray aspects with the concept of justice. There are no villains, just two people with differing ideals. Sure, it's a bit subtle and certainly doesn't do things as well as the anime, but at bare minimum, I appreciate the effort. Also, I like that they focused on the aspect of Kira being a god in this. The original anime was so focused on Light and L's battle that you didn't really get to see the effects of Kira calling himself a god. Again, it doesn't do as much as I'd like, but at least it makes an attempt, which is appreciated. This film really does drop a lot of the depth that the anime had hidden under the surface though. I get that it's made for a different kind of audience, but not every film needs to be an action-packed thriller. Sometimes a more thoughtful approach works, but this film doesn't go for that approach. Instead, it focuses on crazy scenes that, while mildly entertaining to watch, result in nothing more than just junk food for the brain. These scenes, and in general the whole movie, won't really get you to think. It takes the lazier route, which I think is probably the worst part about this film. Had more thought been put into it, they could have created something that would remain interesting forever. Instead, they made a flavor of the month action film that may contain some depth, but will likely be forgotten by the majority of the public afterwards. But we still need to get to my favorite aspect of this film, the ending. Spoilers, by the way, skip to the time indicated on the screen if you don't want the ending ruined for you. After Light gets fooled by Mia, the film takes a weird turn as it focuses on the romance as Light attempts to stop Mia from being absolutely insane about getting the notebook. I mean, she's already written his name in the Death Note, so that's how far she's gone to try and get power. After a pretty impressive scene on a Ferris wheel, Mia dies from having her name written in the notebook, while Light survives miraculously. At the end, it's revealed that this was all planned out by Light, and that he orchestrated all of those events. This is the one moment where I feel like this film really exudes the brilliance that the original series does. This moment of triumph, where his whole plan comes to fruition, felt just like another event that Light would have gone through in the anime. In fact, this is the first time where Light actually resembles the Light in the anime. Sure, there's some painful acting on the Ferris wheel, but all of this is worth it for the ending. In fact, upon the second watch, the twist felt even better. If there's one thing I think that makes this film entirely worth watching, it's the ending. It's brilliant, and as far as I'm concerned, feels right in line with the original series. So, upon reflection, Netflix's Death Note is highly flawed. The acting can be downright bad at times, the beginning of the film and small segments afterward are obnoxious at times, Light is way worse than he was in the anime, and the movie in general veers a little too much into the lazy action film area at times. But, and trust me, this is a big one, it's not the worst film either. It's got some really cool aspects, in fact. Ryuk is absolutely amazing. Mia is much crazier than she was in the anime. The plot could be genuinely fun at times. It's actually surprisingly smart at times. The film's gorgeous. It's exciting regardless of how many times I watched it, and its ending is absolutely worth watching the film for as far as I'm concerned. The film is one of those half and half situations, where I wouldn't say the film's horrendous or great, it's simply mediocre. There's certainly a lot of room for improvement, but I've seen Dragon Ball Evolution, and this isn't Dragon Ball Evolution. I absolutely love some parts, and other parts I downright dislike. So, this film is mediocre. If you're still watching this video and wondering whether you should check it out, I'd say it depends. If you've never seen Death Note, it's an alright film on its own. It's got some plot holes and annoying elements here and there, but you still might like it. I'd recommend watching the series afterwards because it's absolutely brilliant. If you're just a Death Note fan wondering whether it's worth sitting down and watching, I'd say as long as you already have a Netflix subscription, it couldn't hurt. At worst, you'll be able to laugh at the film if you don't like it, and at best, you might get some kind of genuine enjoyment out of it. All that bearing in mind that you know going in that this is going to be a different film. And for me, this film is simply mediocre. It wasn't trash like I was expecting, but I'd rather just watch the anime again, to be honest. Still, I'm glad I watched it. It certainly wasn't perfect, but I enjoyed enough of it to be happy. And at bare minimum, even if you hated this film, we got one valuable thing from it. People are talking about Death Note again. It makes me extremely happy to see the series finally getting attention again. I know you guys probably wanted me to rip it to shreds, but I'm sorry, I didn't hate it that much.
Wait, what? There's no potato chip scene. What the heck is wrong with this film? It's completely worthless now. It's the worst movie ever.